Good afternoon. How are you
Afternoon,
today?
Mike.
My
I'm
name
well.
is
How about
Mike.
yourself?
Uh, okay, I'll bring you on in a second. um, uh, I'm sorry, I got distracted there. My name is Mike Thomas. I'm the COO and co-founder of the Track Selling Institute, a sales training powerhouse that is innovating in the AI space these days. Welcome and welcome to our fifth live stream. We took the summer off. Our last one was in May, and we're now getting back into the swing of things here in the fall. And we'll have one this month, a live stream this month. Next month, we're planning on doing a live stream on our initiatives in the area of artificial intelligence. And then in November and December, we have a couple of other guests that will be joining us for those live streams. Our guest today is Dr. James Chitwood. Jim is the nephew of the founder of the track selling, or the developer of the track selling system, Roy Chitwood, and a stellar individual in his own right, but has that unique relationship with Roy Chitwood, who was the developer of the track selling system. So, Jim, how are you doing today? Good to see you. Thanks for joining us. We're really excited about your content today. It should be a fantastic session, and we're looking forward to hearing what you have to say.
Awesome. Thanks, Mike. It's a pleasure to be here. I am equally excited to share my perspective and hopefully provide value to your listeners today.
Yeah, great. So, the topic today, as we had in our opening session here, hold on a second, is why most corporate culture initiatives are doomed to fail. That doesn't sound very encouraging, Jim. But that is the topic for today, and we would love to hear more about that topic. Can you tell me kind of how you got there? How did you get to this point of becoming a performance culture expert, starting your company, and helping organizations meet their goals and not be doomed to failure?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I'll just start by stating that what we're going to discuss today, this is based on my own performance culture model. The model is based upon my own doctoral research, 20 plus years of leading organizations. It's not a simple fix. It's actually rather complex, which is why I'm currently writing a book that I anticipate being released at the beginning of the year. I had zero desire to become a consultant when I decided to pursue a doctorate. I'm simply a geek and I wanted to challenge myself and see if I could get it done. And I'll tell you, there was nothing more academically challenging than that doctoral path. So, I'm kind of like a reluctant consultant. It wasn't the path that I wanted to go down. It was just the path God and the universe kind of directed me to go. And so that's what's brought me here today is to try to share some wisdom and hopefully create environments where employees thrive.
Super. Well, I think it's going to be a fascinating discussion. I have obviously looked over your outline and know a little bit of what's coming. So it's really cool to see what you had. We've had lots of discussions, obviously. Again, one thing I want to mention is that you're a track selling affiliate. We have about a half a dozen affiliates, people who are phenomenal fans, fanatics of the track selling system, and we're very excited to have you on board as one of our affiliates and promoting your business. So that's kind of part of our model is our affiliates not only help us grow, but we help them grow. And this session today is an attempt to do that for both of us. So best of luck. Tell me
Thank you.
why, Dr. J, you think that culture won't last. What are the factors that doom people to failure?
Sure, absolutely. So, in my opinion, the primary reasons most corporate culture initiatives are doomed to fail is because they focus on the social systems within the organizations, aka the people. Now, I know that's rather contrarian because, of course, the culture involves the people. But those people exist within an organizational environment. And I believe that it is that environment that matters in the long term. People move, people transition, leaders leave. It's that environment that lasts the test of time, right? And so the best way to fix that environment is by focusing on the formal systems within the organization. No amount of work trying to make people happy is going to work if the fundamental operating structure is not focused on the long-term value add for the organization. There's this really interesting thing that I uncovered doing my own doctoral research. So my research was on leadership, satisfaction, and productivity in a sales environment, right? So this is near and dear to my heart. And in doing my literature analysis, and after I came out with, and I'll explain all this more in my book, came out with my findings. One of the findings was extremely shocking, and it was contrarian, and it was absolutely opposite of what I expected. So as a good researcher, I let the data stand as the data stood and go see what else collaborates or corroborates this information. And so, as I was digging, one of the fundamental studies in performance in an organizational environment was conducted in a light bulb factory called the Hawthorne light bulb factory. And those social scientists were trying to figure out how to boost productivity. And one of the things that they found right away is that everything they did seemed to work. And then what they found out was that actually it was a simple fact that they were studying people that caused the changes in behavior. We colloquially know this as the Hawthorne Effect. And so if you Google it, you'll see really funny images of a manager looking at people and now the people are dancing, right? And what that means is, you have employees who've never been asked their opinion, who've never been engaged in conversations about what's going to make them happier in their workplace or satisfied in their workplace or engaged in their workplace, which is the modern phraseology we use, engagement. Gallup has a wonderful tool for this measurement. The challenge is the Hawthorne effect is real. And so the minute you start studying something, you influence it. So the minute you start analyzing these people who've never been asked their opinion, now all of a sudden they are happier and more engaged because somebody for the first time in their career in that org has actually asked them questions that relate to their engagement, satisfaction, and productivity.
Cool. So the very fact that you're actually looking at the situation does change their behavior clearly.
Absolutely.
And so what impact does that have on the performance culture, on the overall performance? Because you can't be monitoring people all the time, clearly, so that their productivity is high and they're constantly enhancing themselves. What do you do in an organization to make that kind of a permanent effect without that ongoing management or micromanagement in this case?
Yeah, well, you have to really look at the fundamental elements of the environment. And that was another outcome, both in my doctoral research and then when I went back and I found the Hawthorne effect, which is, I don't, decades upon decades earlier study, really showed the same thing, how powerful that environment is. And that's really core to your question, right? Is the leader can't be there every day. And if people are only performing because they're being looked at, then they're actually just doing a performance, right? They're not performing. Those are two different things, right? They're simply doing it because they're being looked at. And so you've got to figure out how to create an environment where employees thrive. And I believe there's four fundamental elements that do that. I believe that the training within an organization is fundamental to people's ability to do their job and do their job well. I believe the recognition system needs to be very well thought out. And pay is like the bottom level of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So many organizations only know pay and some little tokens of appreciation, but they don't really give it a strategic consideration. And then accountability. How are we holding people accountable, and how does that change over time? And then honestly, the most powerful element to building a strong cultural environment is the internal communication strategy. Organizations spend significant funds and resources considering how they will communicate to the external world, right? Their external communication strategy, and pay little to zero thought and time and resources into how do they communicate internally. And nothing will motivate or demotivate an employee faster than the communication. Okay, pay, well, you take someone's pay around, you're going to demotivate them pretty quickly. You give them a huge raise, they're going to be motivated pretty quickly, but that's not going to last a test of time, right? Because pay is just a baseline motivator element. So it is the training, recognition, accountability, and communication that all have to be thought of as one strategy. Yes, organizations have a training strategy and this and that, but what they don't do is look at them as a holistic picture. And that's really the missing piece, right? Is considering them as an entire symbiotic relationship, the way they all work together. So in my model, I talk about the four elements: training, recognition, accountability, and communication. If you look at most, I'm just picturing in my head so many presentations I've seen when they talk about the pillars that stand up your culture. And the problem I have with pillars is, yes, pillars are strong, and yes, pillars support, but pillars don't touch. They shouldn't, anyways. You got a different problem, right? I use elements because elements come together to create something stronger, right? And they are very fluid and they're always moving around. And so in an organization, we have to recognize that we're not dealing with machines. People are not machines. They are very fluid. They have good days and bad days, right? They take vacations, they get sick, they leave the organization. And so the company has to consider all of these variables and how they come together over the long haul. And it is, again, that's the other piece to it that really matters. You know, so many organizations have a game plan for the next quarter or the next year, and that's it, right? They're not looking at 5-year strategies. They're looking at just that next. How do we make sure we hit the next quarter's numbers, not the long-term health of the organization? You know, I liken this to I have a sister who worked in alternative fuel research for a major auto manufacturer, and she worked with governments across the world on their energy strategies. And I was discussing um, why we in America don't have, you know, a stronger energy plan. And her answer was pretty simple. She said, "Well, Jim, we have, you know, I work with countries that have 1,000-year energy strategies, right? They're planning for the next 1,000 years. In America, we're only worried about the next 3 years because that's how long people are elected into office." Well, the same is true in organizations. You know, your average sales leader has a 2-year life cycle. It's currently about 18 months. Well, let's just round back up to 2 years, which it used to be before the pandemic. A 2-year life cycle. So every 2 years, you're cycling through a new sales leader. And if you're looking at your CEO, your average CEO has got a 5-year life cycle. So that type of transition happening at the top has a cascade effect through the entire organization. And so the organization needs to think beyond the single leader monitoring performance to create an environment that produces performance because people want to produce. They hold each other accountable to production. They support each other when someone is down, sick, on vacation, unable to carry the ball, right? And so, again, it's that symbiotic relationship of the four elements working together to create that stronger environment.
Super. That really helps a lot. Do you want to go into each of those elements and spend a little bit of time telling us what is required to implement
Yeah,
the training, recognition, accountability, and communication strategies for a well balanced company?
yeah, absolutely. You know, so often a person is promoted to their very first management job because they're very good at doing their job. And then they're just expected to perform as a manager. No one's ever taught them how to manage. They're really good at what they did, but getting other people to do it isn't in their wheelhouse. And so one of two things happens. More often than not, that's where you get micromanagement from. It's because that manager is saying, "Oh, well, you have to do it the way I did it because I was successful. And if you just do it the way I did it, you'll be successful." The problem with that logic is that no two people are the same. No two people will ever do the same thing exactly the same way because we are a dynamically beautiful, unique human being. And that's just how we are, right? And so the problem is nobody trained that individual to be a manager. And there's two elements to this. One, there is management, which is making someone do a job. The other is leadership, and that is getting somebody to want to do the job, right? They're both equally powerful in the organization. They are both required, yet they are often looked at differently. They're not looked at symbiotically, and rarely are they ever actually done. I had the fortunate existence. So again, I didn't plan this. Where I am today was simply one day I had this massive aha moment, and I saw all the pieces click together, and I went, "Oh my goodness, that's why I've been successful. That's why my teams have performed, was because I was doing these things." And so I had the fortune in my very first one of my first organizations was a learning training organization, and they had training material for every management level in the organization. And that organization was wonderfully successful, scaled across the nation at breakneck paces. Why? Because they had, if you were promoted to be a manager, there was training material to teach you how to be a manager. And then if you became a director, there was training material to teach you how to manage managers, right? Which isn't the same as managing frontline employees.
Right.
Then if you became a VP, that material existed, right? And so the big disconnect in most organizations is that, one, if they have training material, rarely is it focused on every element of the organization. And if it is, then it's only half the picture and not the other half, right? Leadership and management are required. Every organization is different, and they need to spend the time developing the training material to speak about how do they want to manage and how do they want to lead. How do they want their managers to do it? How do they want their directors to do it? How do they want their VPs to do it, right? So that every level along the way, when somebody receives a promotion, there is a support system in there to teach them how to do that job the way that organization expects and wants it done. So that's training, right? Most organizations, there's that ubiquitous annual HR training that always comes around, right? There might be some compliance training that comes around because a new regulation has changed, but rarely is there that really in-depth, holistic look at training as a life cycle for the employee. Um,
I'm sorry, Jim. Does the training have to be created uniquely for each organization, or are there templates or standards that you can implement that potentially you could bring in as a performance culture
yeah,
expert?
yeah. So well, it's both. So, like track selling, for example, track selling is a wonderfully structured sales process that allows for the flexibility for the environment, right? And so we're talking about when, this is a 7-step process, very systematic, and yet is designed to also be able to be adapted. So that's the way I would look at this is, and then, track selling has how to manage salespeople, has the same thing, right? And then the point there is that you need to deal with a template. You got to have a baseline. And then from there, you can customize it to the organization.
Okay, cool. What is the second element then that you focus on in your 4 element process?
Yeah, so it's recognition, and recognition's fascinating because it directly connects into the accountability, which we'll chat about in a moment. Um, I've been interviewing sales leaders for the past year and CEOs for the past year, and nearly without fail. Matter of fact, the only one who really had what I considered an extremely robust recognition strategy that focused way beyond pay was because it was a nonprofit organization. Let's just say the whole world knows the name of this organization. They are extremely successful and they have a very robust recognition strategy. Why? Because they don't use pay as the motivator, right? For every other sales leader I talked to, nearly without fail, they said, well, we have bonuses, right? You can make more money by bonuses, and that is not a long-term motivator. It is nice, but it is not intrinsically motivating for most people, right? So, a recognition strategy needs to acknowledge the fact that no two people are the same, and it needs to be robust enough to adapt to the individual. Now, don't get me wrong, you've got 300 employees, you can't have 300 different, you know, elements of recognition, but you can have fundamental structures that allow you to recognize people slightly differently. And one of the outcomes that came out of my study and one of the outcomes that came out of the Hawthorne study is that power of that environment, the power of the coworkers and the team. And I'm a real big believer that peer-to-peer recognition is equally as strong as recognition from a supervisor. And now the trick here is it has to be perceived as equitable, right? The employees have to believe that this isn't just a proxy for management recognition of individual performance. It has to be team members recognizing each other. Now, the catch here is it can't just be employee X came in and made me feel better today because they were so positive in their attitude, right? While that's important, we are talking about organizations that are either growing or failing. It's really that simple. Your organization's either growing to meet growing expenses or it's not, and then soon it will die, right? So you have to have a recognition strategy that is directly tied to the organization's outcomes and how to achieve that. And when a peer member can recognize another peer member, when a department can recognize another department that has provided value to help them achieve their organizational goals and helping the organization grow and thrive, well, now you're hitting the mark really at that level. See, because what's fascinating when you look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, you've got baseline, which is the physiological needs like compensation. That's where that falls. And then you have the social the aspects of those team activities that occur, and that's really important. But in the middle is this section that is missed out, and that is the power of the social systems among people, right? There's this old saying that employees quit managers and stay for their coworkers, right? I'm working with an organization right now, and there are some challenges, and nearly without fail, even though there's challenges, everybody said, I love our product, I love our org, I love my people that I work with. And that's a very powerful statement, right? So finding ways for those people to recognize each other in a positive, productive, performance-oriented fashion, it goes a very long way.
How formal does that system have to be? Do you document it? Do you use Slack or other tools so that there's some record of it? Help me understand a little bit more about the formality of the process of recognition.
Yeah, great question. And it needs to be formal because it needs to be documented, right? Because this goes into people's records. And it should go into both the person who acknowledged and the person who received, right? And so the ideal structure would be, well, I'm a real big believer in bringing the entire team together every week. So many organizations don't do that. And it's hard on the leader. It's really hard to make sure you're prepared every Monday morning for an all team, all staff, all organization meeting. Takes a lot out of the leader. Yet I'm a big believer in that. So, anyways, because that helps communication and that team environment. But so what the ideal setup would be: you have a formal submission process, and then you have a review process. And yes, the review needs to come from leadership. They're the ones who have to be looking at it, saying, okay, is this recognition really acknowledging performance-oriented activities? And then if it is, on a monthly basis or quarterly basis, I recommend monthly, then a formal award is given to the recipient. This is an example of a star that we used to give to employees. You know that old saying, there's this old saying about the little boy on a beach chucking sand dollars into the earth or starfish into the ocean, and some wise old man says, you're not making a difference at all. And he chucks one in the water and looks at him and he goes, well, I just made a difference to that one. That was the story behind it. That's why we did this. When I left that organization, they gave me one of these just to say thank you. And what was great about it is people would have this on their desk. It was like a little trophy, but it wasn't something that took a lot of room, right? And so it was valuable to them to get this. I mean, this cost $25, I think, in the grand scheme of thing. Right, that's a lunch bill. And people really valued them, and they could sit on their desk. So I highly recommend something extremely formal. Not extremely formal. Extremely is probably the wrong word, but definitely structured and definitely formal. That answer that question, Mike?
Yes, it does. That's very good. Thank you. One of the questions I had is how do you make that, I don't know what the right word is, fair? My experience is in peer recognition systems is that there's always one or two people that are really good about recognizing uh, their peers, and then the rest of the team, it might be 80%. I don't know what the right number is. Just don't do it. They either don't think about it or they don't think it's important. How do you engage the entire team in this formal process?
Sure, absolutely. Um, Great question. And by the way, Mike, can you hear my English bulldog snoring?
I can't right now. Nope.
Okay, thank goodness. So I have an English bulldog puppy. He is imprinted on me. He's my boy. We're best buds, and you've never heard anything snore like an English bulldog. So,
Well, my
uh,
dog could give you a run for the money if she was down here.
okay, fair enough, fair enough. So that old 80-20 rule, it does hold, and so that's where some of the formality comes in, right? And so you do make some parameters, like you can't just be, one person can't be promoting over every year, or month after month after month. But I believe that if it's well documented and it is very public and it is done in a group setting, then you find people are far more interested in doing it. And here's the thing: it shouldn't just be a token. It shouldn't just be, we're just recognizing somebody because we're looking for someone to recognize. If there's
Right.
nobody who's nominated, then nobody helped anybody out. Now, more than once in my life, I've stood in front of a room of people and said, okay, so this month we don't have any recognition to give out. And, the peer reckoning, the Star Award, it was called. I said, and so what that's told me is that none of you felt your coworkers helped you achieve your goals, help the organization achieve its goals. And if that's true, well, then we probably need to have another conversation to figure out what's really going on.
Yeah.
Right. And that's a level of very transparent, intimate level conversations that a good leader should be able to have with their people if they have a psychologically safe environment and a transparent, communication.
Okay. Cool. Thanks. That's a great answer to that question. I have experienced it and been in organizations where there's just this imbalance and everybody feels like it's not a very fair system because of that.
Right. Right.
Let's move on to accountability. You said that was the third element of your process. Why don't we talk a little bit about
Yeah.
that?
Yes. I'm always amazed at how many organizations never consider, right, when they build the accountability metrics for a position, they don't ever really change. Even a salesperson who has been with an organization for a while, they might get bigger accounts, more, accounts that have a more material impact in the organization, but they're still just doing accounts, right? And truth of the matter is, when a person has been doing a job over a period of time, actually after about 3 years, it's not really a full-time job for them. Well, depending on the job, some jobs is just so much intake coming in that they have no choice. But the point here is, humans are so beautifully complex that we learn and adapt and just get better and faster at what we do, to where we become unconsciously competent in something. We no longer have to think about it. We're just seamless at it, right? And so to me, an accountability structure that allows a person to, when they get to certain tenure based marks in their organization, 3 years, 5 years, 7 years, 10 years, something like that, rewards them for that with, one, definitely slightly more money, while also slightly more responsibilities. So, can the person be involved in training the new people after a period of time? Can they be mentors? Can you get them involved in your marketing copy? I was just interviewing somebody, and she has nothing to do with marketing, but happens to be extremely creative. She's been with the company 5 years. She said, I have so many great ideas. I would love to be involved. And what would it take that organization to allow her to carve out 5% of her time to give feedback to the marketing team on elements, right? Doesn't cost the organization nearly anything. And what does it do to the employee? It rewards the employee by tapping into things that are intrinsically valuable to them. Many people love to train. It's a neat thing about us. Like, we like to give to other people and help them by showing that we know how to help them. And it also helps us feel smart because, right, we're helping them with our smartness, and we're training them. And so by recognizing that when somebody's been doing a job for a while, that they're probably no longer need to have this be the only thing that they do, and give them other ways to contribute value to the organization. Well, now what you're doing here is you're really starting to tap into those highest levels of Maslow's hierarchy of needs by tapping into true intrinsic value, right? Maybe the person really wants to spend some time donating to time and energy in some charitable fashion, or be involved in green energy and the company's environmental footprint, right, or impact. So these are just ways that you can give people the ability, after they've been with the organization for a while, not necessarily breaks from their day-to-day job, but literally additional duties. But those duties are ones that they don't see as work. They see it as, wow, the company really cares about me, and they're giving me an ability to stretch my skill set, grow, learn, develop, and give back in a way that I truly, truly find valuable.
Great. What a great idea. Is it important to have a formal tracking of that
Mhm.
contribution too, so that people understand what, if they're spending 5% of their time, that's what, 2 hours a week? A lot of managers that say, oh, I don't have that to give up. But if it's really contributing to the health and welfare of the company, it could make a significant difference. So is formality on that also important?
Yeah, I was just going to say, and it really contributes to the morale of the individual, the engagement of the individual, right? And that's critical, right? They get that value from knowing that, man, my company cares about me so much that they're going to let me do this other thing that I really, really love. And how awesome is that? And yeah, it needs to be tracked, right? You know, none of this should be loose, willy nilly. It needs to be strategic. It needs to be documented. It needs to be formal, and it really needs to be tracked. So it shouldn't just be, okay, well, go do some charity work. It's okay, well, what is that charity work, and where were you, and were you wearing our gear, and were you promoting our organization, right? Let's be honest. I know very few organizations that write a big check to a charitable org and then don't have that check shown up on their socials, right? Because PR does matter, and we want, it's a beautiful thing about the new consumer base, is that they care if organizations that they put money into are doing good for our planet. So tangentially, I'm excited to see where that takes our world. But yes, to your question, it needs to be formally documented.
Cool. The thing that struck me when you were doing your introduction is the fact that communication is so critical. And I do recognize and understand, having been in many organizations, large and small, that external communication is clearly the focus. And external or internal communication is rarely paid certainly as much attention, if any, in terms of their overall organizational health. So let's spend a little time talking about what the internal communication strategy could be for an organization that would help them improve their performance culture.
Yeah, absolutely. Great question, Mike. One of the fundamental flaws is external brand speak is used internally. And
Interesting point.
I've interviewed so many people who are like, yeah, well, we basically just take our external communication and it's all done in brand speak. And then that's how we funnel that down. And the problem is it doesn't connect with people, right? And so a true internal communication strategy will do several things. One, any message that's being sent down through the chain is adapted to the individual departments. Why? Because what matters is, there's this old phrase in sales, what will it do for me, right? What's in it for me? And that's very, very, very true. Where do I gain value? And that's what the employees are thinking, right? So how does this help them do their job? Right? That's what the communication needs to be adapted to, is understanding who the reader is, which is engineering, sales, operations, Human resources, I just hit some of the fundamentals there. How do you adapt the message to them? Another core element are a consistent focus on focus groups, right? Consistently having focus groups with the front line, with the departments to hear what they're hearing and seeing. I'm a real big believer that the canary in the coal mine for every organization is your frontline employee, especially your customer service people. They're the ones hearing what your competitors are doing. They're the ones hearing how your consumers feel. And yet, at the top of the organization, they're typically just looking at data, return levels and satisfaction scores, net promoter scores, right? But rarely they're holding true focus groups and listening to people. So real big believer that one, you've got to tailor your message to the audience and individual departments. Two, you've got to have strong focus groups that are consistent. It's not just once a year, oh, let's go do something because we thought of it. It's okay, every quarter, every half, we've got focus groups. So we are consistently receiving feedback. And then there needs to be both a formal and an anonymous feedback channel that goes up to the C-suite, right? And that C-suite, that executive office level, needs to acknowledge that they've received communication and explain back to the organization what they're doing based upon it. Now, don't get me wrong. I don't believe that just because somebody says an idea, you have to do it, but you do have to acknowledge that it was received, and you do have to explain why that situation or why that suggestion will not work, right? That has to happen. So, an internal communication strategy needs to be very formal. It needs to have a channel that goes from the bottom back up to the top. It needs to have focus groups, and it needs to have its messages adapted to the individual departments or thought of as, how does it help me do my job?
Cool. One of the questions I have is, communication mediums have changed significantly over the last few years. What do you find is the most effective communication technique, if you want to call it that, for distributing or communicating the company communication, company line or whatever you want to call it? Is it email? Is it video? Is there something today that is working better than any other technique?
Well, that's a great question, Mike. The challenge is that the medium will consistently change. It'll consistently evolve, right? And so what we do today had better not be what we're doing tomorrow, or we haven't grown and changed, and that's not good. I believe email is a wonderful support tool. It's a terrible sales tool, right? It supports, it doesn't sell. Same thing with communication, right? It should be supporting a communication that was delivered. It shouldn't be considered the medium to deliver messages. It should be the medium to support the messages that are delivered. I'm a real big believer in having consistent, open conversations. Again, that's why I like the every Monday morning meeting, right? I just do. For the entire organization, it can be 15 minutes if that's what it takes. But bringing everybody together to have a quick conversation is very powerful. I remember I was in an org and I brought up the P&L in the very first meeting. And first people were like, why are you showing us the P&L? Nobody's ever done this before. So, well, I want you to know what keeps me up at night. And I want you to understand the bigger picture. And I'm confident you will make better decisions because of it. True enough, they all did. Well, sooner or later, they got it. And they all made better decisions because they understood how the greater health of the organization was working. So back to your question, Teams, it's a DM tool, right? Slack, it's a DM tool. It should be a quick back and forth. Email should be a great support tool. And if you're going to deliver a message as the executive leaders in an organization, as leaders of any kind, it needs to be as close to live as possible. If you can't do it live, then you do it via video. 10 years from now, you do it by a hologram, whatever the case may be. You need to engage at a more personal level and not consider the static nature of email and DMing as the appropriate medium, in my opinion.
Another interesting question, and you brought up the revelation or the discussions of P&Ls. How do you balance the issue of transparency with the trust or the confidentiality of information that may be being shared?
Well, that's a great question, and I guess on a certain level, it does depend on the organization. Some organizations, I would imagine, are unable to share that, but I would wager most of them can share very high level P&L information to make sure everybody's fully aware of what's going on. Um, I'm just a real big believer in transparency. I just am. I've more than once had somebody say something to me or ask me a question. I've said, I can't actually answer that question. And here's why I can't answer it, right? So telling them that I've acknowledged their question and then I've explained why I'm unable to answer it goes a very, very long way. So that transparency is important.
How do you? Another question I have is, how do you deal with rumors? People said, "Hey, I
Mm,
heard there's going to be layoffs," or "I heard we're introducing a new product," or "I heard that the CEO is leaving." How do you handle, because that's a critical piece of the communication process? What's your recommendation in terms of how you handle, rumors that may or may not be true?
yeah, great question. Great question. One, head on. Two, if you've got a good internal communication strategy and you're doing focus groups, right, and you're tailoring messages to help people understand how that message helps them do their job, it really gets rid of a lot of the rumors because people know that they're going to be getting information. Also, there's strong anonymous feedback channels so they can ask questions, or formal feedback channels so they can formally ask questions. Um, and so, again, if you're having those regular Monday meetings, then it's really easy to say, listen, I'm hearing there's this rumor going on and I want to address it right now. Again, in a live Q&A town hall type meeting. Every meeting I've ever had was half numbers, half quantitative, half qualitative, right? And so that qualitative piece is where you get into the open dialogue and have conversations. So unfortunately, rumors happen and you have to address them head on.
Yeah, great answer. I think in the organizations I've been in, that's been the most effective way. Unfortunately, in organizations I've been in, it hasn't been done very effectively all the time.
Yeah.
So we're getting toward the end of our session here. Is there anything you'd like to say as a recap to the great content that you've already provided?
Just, I've taken, I have a drawer down here and I can't tell you how many assessments, profile assessments, leadership assessments, personality assessments are in there. I think I've taken them all and they're all great. They're just not the panacea people make them out to be because in the heat of the moment, nobody remembers what your communication style is or what your personality, letters are. It's those are neat for the internal individual to maybe know themselves better. They're not necessarily going to help an organization communicate better because in the heat of the moment, nobody ever remembers that. So I and those all to me fall in a leadership training category, right? So just look at that as useful as one element to your strategy. Consider how that training fits into your recognition, your accountability, and your communication, and look at them all as one strategy, and you'll be far better off. Focus on your formal systems, and your social systems will follow.
Great advice. So, if somebody wants to pursue this with you, what's the best way to engage with you? Is it on LinkedIn or through email, or help me understand
Yeah,
what
yeah.
you'd
So
prefer?
they can email me directly. I believe my email address is on the main page. There it is. Thank you so much.
Yep.
Dr. J at performanceculture.expert. Shoot me an email. My first conversation is always free. I'm a big believer in paying it forward. I wouldn't even be doing this live webinar with you. So I'm happy to have a conversation, try to help organizations. And if it makes sense to engage in deeper work, I will. They can go to my website, submit a form that way. But the easiest way is just to email me directly. Or you can DM me on LinkedIn. No problem there. Message me on LinkedIn and I will definitely follow up.
Yeah, thank you, Jim. The other thing you can do is on our Track Selling Institute site, we do have
Hmm.
an affiliate page for you. And people, if they didn't have time to write it down, they can go to our website and look up under affiliates for Dr. James Chitwood, and find the information there. Also, I think you also have a telephone number, if I remember correctly, on that page. So,
I
um,
do.
great stuff. Any final thoughts? Any words of wisdom as we part here?
No, if you're watching this podcast or this webinar, then you live stream, whatever the phrase is, then you care about people, and that's awesome. It's a great place to start. We should all be here to lift each other up, and I'm just excited to play my part in creating environments where employees thrive. So good on you for listening. I wish you the best of luck. Please feel free to reach out and let me know how to help you.
Thank you very much, sir. I really appreciate it. We are going to end our session here, and it'll be available on YouTube and LinkedIn, both as if people want to watch it later. And then I believe, Jim, you're going to also put it on your website
Yes, sir.
for future viewing.
Yes, sir. Thank you,
And
Mike.
with that, thank you very much. I appreciate everybody attending today, and I look forward to seeing you next month when we do our next live stream on, well, hopefully, we're going to be talking a little bit about artificial intelligence. So look forward to seeing you then. Thanks a lot. Bye.